Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world, and join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling history on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is December 29th, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1960, former WCW commentator Mark Madden. 1987, one half of the Spanish announced team tag team, Will Maximo. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for December 29th. 2009, Dr. Death, Steve Williams. All right, enough of the sad stuff. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. That's right, these are your pro wrestling history highlights for December 29th. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and going all the way to 1922, where we see Sam Hanna defeat Kid Ross to become the first Canadian welterweight champion in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, Canada. Jumping 15 years to 1937, Lou Thesz defeats Everett Marshall for the National Wrestling Association and Midwest Wrestling Association World Heavyweight titles in St. Louis, Missouri. Thesz would also be awarded the vacant American Wrestling Association Boston World title shortly thereafter. Making two stops in 1955, first, Fritz von Erich and Carl von Schuber defeat Whipper Billy Watson and Ilio DiPaolo for the NWA Canadian Open Tag Team titles in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, beginning Von Erich and von Schuber's second reign. Our second stop in 1955 sees Bob Geigel defeat Ron Heffernan to win the NWA Southwest Heavyweight title in Amarillo, Texas. That next year in 1956, Ben and Mike Sharp defeat Enrique Torres and Ron Etchison in Fresno, California to win the San Francisco version of the NWA World Tag Team titles for a 13th time. Grooving to the year 1960, Tiny Mills and Stan Kowalski defeat Whipper Billy Watson and Ilio DiPaolo for the NWA Canadian Open Tag Team titles in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, ending Watson and DiPaolo's fourth reign. That next year in 1961, Don Curtis defeats Carl Krauser, aka Carl Gotch, to win the NWA Eastern States Heavyweight title in Columbus, Ohio. A 3-year jump this time to 1964. Tarzan Tyler defeats Bob Orton in Tampa, Florida to win the Florida version of the NWA Southern Heavyweight title, ending Orton's second reign. Our final stop in the groovy 60s, 1967. Bob Kelly defeats Don Carson for the NWA Tri-State Louisiana Heavyweight title in Lafayette, Louisiana, ending Carson's third reign. Grabbing my bell-bottoms and making two stops in 1972. First, Rick Gibson defeats the Wrestling Pro for the NWA Alabama Heavyweight title in Dothan, Alabama. Our second stop in 72 sees Buddy Colt win the Georgia version of the NWA Southern Heavyweight title for a second time, defeating Bob Armstrong in Atlanta, Georgia. Another two stops this time, but in 1973. First, Moondog Mayne defeats Pat Patterson for the San Francisco version of the NWA United States Heavyweight title in San Francisco, California, ending Patterson's third reign. Our second stop in 73, Don Green and Bearcat Brown defeat the interns Tom Andrews and Jim Starr to win the NWA Mid-American Tag Team titles in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Making three stops in 1974, first, Fritz von Erich defeats Blackjack Lanza for the WCCW American Heavyweight title in Dallas, Texas, beginning his 13th reign as champion. Second in 74, the Crusaders, Dewey Robertson and Billy Red Lions, defeat the Love Brothers, Reginald and Hartford Love, to win the Toronto version of the NWA International Tag Team titles in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, beginning and ending both teams' second reigns. And our third and final stop in 74, Ron Fuller won a tournament for the vacant Mid-American version of the NWA Southern Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee. Grabbing my boombox and going to the 80s, 1985. The National Wrestling Alliance and American Wrestling Association hold their third joint promoted NWA-AWA Star Wars event in East Rutherford, New Jersey, with a main event of Stan Hansen defeating AWA World Heavyweight Champion Rick Martel by submission to win the title. Hansen had Martel in Bronzo Valley Backbreaker, aka the Boston Crab, when Martel would try to power out. Hansen would press his head against the middle turnbuckle to keep a hold. Martel eventually submitted. That next year in 1986, Adrian Street defeats Wendell Cooley in Birmingham, Alabama to win the NWA Southeastern Heavyweight title for a fourth time, ending Cooley's second reign. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1991. WCW holds the 9th annual Starrcade event, the first under the WCW name, at the Norfolk Scope in Norfolk, Virginia. This event featured the first of 2 Starrcades with the Lethal Lottery, a random drawing to pair 16 teams, with the 16 men on the 8 winning teams competing in a 2-ring Battle Bowl Battle Royal, which this year Sting won the Battle Bowl Battle Royal, last eliminating Lex Luger. Fast forwarding to 1996, WCW holds the 14th annual Starrcade in Nashville, Tennessee. This would be the last Starrcade in the Music City where the previous 2 events were held. The remaining 4 Starrcades would be held in Washington, D.C. The main event sees Roddy Piper defeat WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hulk Hogan by TKO with a sleeper in a non-title match. This was Hogan's first clean loss since his loss of the WWF World title to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6 in 1990. And last but not least, 1998, Mankind defeats The Rock to win the WWF World title at a Raw is War taping in Massachusetts. The show would air the following Monday, January 4th, 1999. That night, Tony Schiavone would reveal the result during a WCW Monday Night Nitro airing live that night, noting that Mankind as champion ought to put a lot of butts in seats. Schiavone would later claim Eric Bischoff fed him the line to say, "Those were your short but sweet pro wrestling history highlights for December 29th. I'm the Eclectic Gentleman Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow."